Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? Hey, you ever sit around and wonder, how do people get rides? I want to get a ride. How do I get a used ride? Well, you can go out and buy used rides. Or you could just go out and get one because you can get a ride with absolutely no money at all if you're in the right place at the right time. And I want to talk about it. So let's get into it.
Now get ready. Here we go.
Okay, so we've heard this before. We've heard parks say, okay, we're going to get rid of this ride. And some parks sell it off. They sell the ride off to another park. They say this ride's perfectly good. Let's get rid of the thing. And some parks don't. They just show up and scrap the ride. And everyone's sitting around going, what the heck? What was all that about? Right now, we just had over at Six Flags Great Adventure, we had the Green Lantern ride. It's one of many get scrapped. And what they did was they tore the ride out and tore it up completely. And I'm sitting around going, nobody else wanted that ride? Man, I want that ride. I'm looking around like, property's kind of cheap in Nebraska. Maybe I can just buy some. How much land does Green Lantern actually need to sit on? Maybe I could just go buy some and bring it here and set it up. Wouldn't that be cool? I'm sure a lot of you have had the same thought. Man, what would I do for a roller coaster in the backyard if you had the land to do it? Well, interestingly enough, rides that get scrapped most of the time are free. They don't actually cost anything. They're going to wind up in the trash. Is it that cut and dry? No, it's not that cut and dry, and that's the reason for the video. So when a park makes the decision to scrap a ride, they're not literally scrapping the entire ride, okay? So parts and pieces are being taken from the ride to feed other rides. We've seen this a lot. A Great Adventure is a Six Flags park. Well, now pretty much everything in the U.S. is a Six Flags park. But it's a Six Flags park, so that ride will actually get absorbed into the rest of the Six Flags network. So the first thing that's always the hot topic is the trains. The trains, even at the rides rumored like, oh, we think we're going to get rid of that ride in 3 years. Even at that point, other parks perked up and they said, we want your trains. I'm not sure how many stand-up coasters are left. But I do know down in Southern California, Magic Mountain, I know they have Riddler's Revenge down there. It should be the same thing. They might have to retrofit some parts and pieces to get it to work right, but they might not want to. They might just be like, no, we want the wheel carriers, we want the frames, we want the seats, we want something like that. And so those parts and pieces, if Six Flags wanted to, if they were in good condition, they would simply just ship those parts and pieces over to Magic Mountain. And they would get, yay, we got more parts for our ride. Now we might be able to consistently deliver a third train, or we might not have to even think about it to take one train off for rehab and start rebuilding it. The first thing that would have to happen with those trains is they have to go through a full refurbishment, NDT, everything else, assuming they were something that could cross from the Green Lantern ride right over to, let's say, Riddler's Revenge. If they can do that, then they would need a full refurbishment, NDT, all the stuff to get current to service bulletins and things like that. Other parks tend to miss little things that happened along the way. We had one park come out and look at our impulse coaster. They had their own impulse coaster, and they looked at ours, and they looked at our wheel carriers and said, where are all your little gussets around the outside? And we said, what are you talking about? And they showed us pictures of theirs, and all theirs had gussets all over it, and we were like, when did that happen? It wasn't a service bulletin. I said, oh no, this is something that we did internally. So I was like, okay, well, we never got the memo about that. So they dug it all up, and they're like, oh yeah, they gave us all the information. And then that next off season, we had to go through and weld gussets all over everything because apparently that was necessary. So going back to the ride itself, though, what else is there? Well, there is the big ticket components. There's compressors, there's motors, there's all sorts of big things like that multiple rides use the same thing of all over the place. We had one park getting dismantled and we needed a lift motor for our flowless roller coaster. Well, they just so happened to have a stand-up roller coaster that used the exact same motor. So the manager over there, the first pick that they did of that new ride, that old ride getting taken apart, was they picked the DC lift motor off the base of the thing and literally like kind of overnighted it to us. It took 2 days to get there. Two people in a van literally drove it across country and showed up with it like a day and a half after we said go. Pretty impressive. But we got that motor. It's like, okay, and there are plenty of other things. Booster motors with the gearbox and everything. They're like, at the time, they were like $5,000-$6,000 a piece. Now I imagine they're closer to $9,000 or $10,000 a piece, just due for inflation. So gearboxes and motors are always one of the first things that come out. Let's go somewhere else. Processors, controllers, not so much. Typically the park will absorb that and they say, oh, we already have a processor like that over here in this area. They're just electric components, but rarely do those ever get pieced apart. Mainly the main cabinets with the big drive components might go somewhere else. We had a top spin. We had another park that got rid of their top spin, and we were in dire need of new drives for our ride. Not brand new drives, but just the original Huss. The manufacturer of them was Typac. We need new Typac drives because these are starting to fail left and right. We told that park what we wanted, and then a couple weeks later, a freight truck showed up, and they had the entire motor control cabinet sitting there because that park didn't want to damage anything, worry about shipping or anything, so they just like, here, just take the cabinets. And it's just like, okay. From the company's point of view, they're simply just transferring assets. Well, this is going from here, it's going over there. The ride was going to be scrapped anyway, so there's no real dollar value associated with it. They're just taking these dead little scraps and moving them around inside their own company. So, do things ever go outside the company? Yeah, they do. But they typically have to be sold off. And when they're sold off, because company they want money out of it, right? That's the reason eBay exists, because people want money out of their old stuff. So when they're sold off, there is a liability that's transferred, because if I sold you a wheel and I said, here, buy this used wheel from me, and you bought it and then the wheel shattered, well, you would want to know, well, was there NDT records? Did you know this was cracked before I bought it and all this other stuff? And if it came apart and did damage, then I would be like, well, are you going to be responsible for the damage that this thing came apart when? So that's why a lot of parks don't get rid of old components. They throw them away because there's too much liability associated with it. But if you have the legal means to get around that liability, you can do stuff. So what do we need? Well, the first thing is you need to stop that transfer of liability, because that is the one thing that the parks are like, nope, we don't want to get rid of this stuff. We don't want to sell it because we're afraid somebody else might use it and get hurt, and then they will come back after the original park for a lawsuit. So that is the biggest thing. So first thing you would need is a lawyer to draw up essentially a release of liability that says, I am going to take this, whatever it is, and I am in no way, shape, or form going to hold the park responsible for it. Okay, so now the park has released liability of the ride. They're like, this ride is no longer ours, and then they're going to give it to you. So how much do you pay for a used ride? Well, if they didn't find any value in the trains or anything else, and they just want it, that literally the whole thing is going to get scrapped, including the trains, which is very rare. Again, the trains are normally pieced out to other parks. But if they didn't want the trains too, you could take 100% of it. How much money? No money. There's a little caveat there, though. We'll talk about that in a minute. So you need a lawyer to say, like, okay, here's the thing. We're going to sign these documents, and we say we're going to completely release that park of all the liability. And then the manufacturer will step in and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. we, the manufacturer, are going to transfer no liability along with that ride. Therefore, when you take that ride out of that park's hands, it is no longer that park's problem. It is no longer that manufacturer's problem either, because that manufacturer did not agree to sell that ride to me, as the end user. They did not agree to do that. So I'm going 100% on my own. Now, this is where most things die out, because if you were to say, I'm going to take that 100% on my own and just use it on my own, but I want to make my own little Ryan the Ride Mechanic land where people can come over and ride my mothballed roller coaster. Well, insurance companies aren't going to get behind that at all. No insurance company would. They're like, nope, if you want to insure the park, which you're going to want to insure the park, all right, and the park and the ride and everything else, they're like, if you want to insure that, you need to have liability. So that means that you need to contact an outside engineering firm to where you are going to develop your own liability, your own inspection program, and everything else. You probably could get the manufacturer of the ride to stand back behind it again, but you need to make sure that during the transfer process, you get all of the documentation to the ride, all of the NDT records, the foundation, layout, footing, supports, all that stuff, because now you have to duplicate that on your new property. So assuming you get all that information, duplicate it on your new property, you probably need the manufacturer to come out, just like they did originally, and help install the ride to make sure that the ride is actually assembled per the manufacturer's standards and it's put up correctly and they're okay with everything that happens in that ride. And you prove to them sufficient NDT, non-destructive testing records, and you've proven to them that you've replaced all the parts and pieces, that it's up to date with a service bulletin, the foundations were shot in to be level, true, and to their correct datum reference to where they're the right spacing apart everywhere. And they could stand behind that ride now and say, okay, that the manufacturer would finally say, okay, we acknowledge that this is our ride, that it still exists, but it's on your property. That might not mean that they accept any liability, though. They might still say, we acknowledge it, we'll sell you parts, we'll offer support, but we're still not going to offer any liability because you literally took that ride out of the trash can, and that's not going to happen. This is, again, a gray area, which I don't think manufacturers would do. I think once you go dumpster diving for a ride, yeah, it's not going to be their ride anymore. They don't want it. So, okay, now we have the legal side of it taken care of. What do we need to do? How would we entice the park to say, give us this ride? Like, if I went to the park and I said, hey, that over there at Six Flags Great Adventure, and I said, hey, I know you guys are going to, and this, you have to get ahead of the curve somehow. This can't be once they've announced that the ride's coming out. Once they announce the ride is going to leave, it's too late. You need to be literally about a year and a half ahead. So you need some sort of insider information. So if you went to the park and said, what is my time frame for this park, for this ride actually coming out? They might say, okay, we are going to get rid of this ride in the off season between 2024 and 2025. And we've got a big project going in its place. All right, so what is the criteria of that ride leaving right there? I want to take the ride. Right now, the park has signed a big check for an external contractor to remove that ride. Well, what's the contractor doing? It's like the contractor is ripping, tearing, cutting, destroying that ride piece by piece to get it down quickly and cheap. Cheap is the ultimate thing here because the park is going to pay that contractor, let's say, $1 million to tear out that Green Lantern ride. Well, that $1 million covers that contractor. It covers their insurance that they need to be on property working. It covers trucks hauling away all the old track pieces. And you got to remember, when these track pieces are taken apart, they're cut. They're flame cut. They are not little nice, gentle, oh, let's unbolt this, coupling here and then gently set this thing down. They're like, nope, We flame cut that end, and then we flame cut the bottom end, and the entire thing just fell down. That's what they're going to do. They don't care because they got people with just nothing but cutting torches sitting there just cutting that stuff apart until it fits into closed cargo containers to where they can get it off-site easily. They don't care about the end product. They need to get the thing ripped out. Are they ripping out the footers? Typically, contractors don't rip out footers. If it was in the bid for that contractor to remove the footers, a lot of the time the contractor will come back and they will kind of meet the park halfway. They say, look, that footer or that pier goes down maybe 50, 60, 70, 80 feet into the ground. There's no way economically you could dig down and remove that footer. So a lot of times what they say is, you know what, dig down 10, maybe 15 feet on each footer, jackhammer the concrete to where it's loose, cut the rebar on the inside to where it's loose, and remove the top 15 feet of that footer, and then put earth back into it, put dirt back on top of it. And that is a ton of work. That is a lot of excavation. That is a lot of concrete removal. It's a lot of weight involved when you're throwing things away. Trash companies charge by weight. So that is a lot of weight. It's a lot of money. All of that money is built into that remover's cost. That's all built inside there. So you may say, well, it took $1 million to get rid of the ride. It's like, yes, it did. But honestly, that company that say, well, over 4 months they removed the ride. Well, that company only got $400,000 of that $1 million. That's what their take home was after all the fees and everything else, because they have to file permits. They have to take the stuff off to the trash. They have to pay for dump trucks to come in and remove things and get them out of there. It's not the park paying for that. They kind of did, but it's the company that they hired takes care of all that stuff, so the park doesn't have to think about it. They're like, we're going to wash our hands of the subject. We don't want to deal with that anymore. So what you're going to get is that construction company is saying, well, the $400,000 is our profit on this. We're going to make $400,000 on this. But internally, they also divide that money up and say, well, it took 4 months, that's $100,000 a month, and then that's got to go to pay to workers and this and that. Now, a lot of that money is accounted for already. The construction company that did it is going to make a sizable amount of money off of it. But the earlier they can get done on that project, the more money they make. So if they say it's going to take us 5 months to remove that ride the way the park wants it, we're going to make $1 million off of it. They just might make a little bit of money. Let's say they make $200,000 extra. But if they could do it 4 months, they might make $400,000 extra. If they could do it in 3 months, they might make $600,000 extra. They keep increasing their profit the shorter that time frame goes. Also, the longer the time frame goes, the more you start running into things like bad weather and things like that. Contractors' worst case scenario is that they say we're going to take this down in 3 months, and it takes them 5 months. That's the worst case scenario. Now you may say, who cares? Because most of the time projects are incremental. They go step by step. You can't start step number 2 until step number 1 is finished. So a lot of times step number 1 is remove the ride and get the footers out of there and get everything back to level and the buildings tore down and all that. Well, if they've got a big project number 2 waiting in the wings and the ride, the old one, step number 1, is not done being removed, well, if they have to wait 2 months and delay that project 2 months, that's going to set everything back. And then the park starts losing a lot of money. Eventually on the back end, they will start losing ticket money because people won't come to the park because their new ride is not open yet. But in the immediate time, they have manufacturers set up to come in and install that new piece of equipment, and they have permitting set up that has to be hit in a date range, and you have to go back and extend permits. It costs money each time. So a lot of times what happens, if you set a project back 2 months, whatever it costs them to set that project back 2 months, if it costs them an extra, $1.5 million to push that project back 2 months, then guess what? That construction company who was removing the ride at the start, they're going to have to pay that $1.5 million because that's a fine, basically. That is the motivation for doing things on time and right. So no construction company wants to fall behind when it comes to removal. That's the reason why things are done so like we're just going to cut and tear and rip and bend until it's gone. Remove the scenario back to our free ride. Remember, because we wanted a free ride. So what we have to do is we have to go during that 1.5-ish time frame before they said we're going to get rid of the ride. Okay, we will take the ride out for you. And then the park is going to say, well, here's our demands. It has to be done to this standard, and it's got to be done in 4 months. Well, the time frame is what drives it. So if I can remove that ride in 4 months, and like the construction company's currently doing, if they're ripping that ride out and say it's going to take us 4 months to do this, and that's cutting and tearing everything, guess what? If I want to remove stuff and make it all nice and gentle and take it apart very carefully and mark everything so I can reuse it on the other end, it's going to take a lot longer than 4 months. It's going to take 6 months, 7 months, maybe 8 months. I don't have that time. The park says I have to do it in 4 months. That's the time frame I have to do it. So I would have to get together all my construction guru friends and everyone volunteering from everywhere else, which good luck getting volunteers insured because, yeah, that's going to be really hard to do. And then I'm going to have to work volunteer crews with cranes and stuff like that we are funding, by the way. We have to fund cranes. We have to do all that other stuff. All that dismantling, all the breaking the footers apart still has to be done. But now I am acting as the contractor to do it. And then if I don't make it on time, now I am going to pay the fees that the new ride is going to absorb because I was late. So this is one of the reasons why people never want to do this stuff. And so they go, okay, I'm going to work my friends who are all want to see this ride removed. We're all going to come out here and we're going to work like nonstop days and nights. We're going to pay a crane 6 times more than that other contractor would have because we want the crane to gently pick stuff, and we're going to set pieces down 1 piece at a time, and we're going to be very careful with it and all that stuff. And then our removal prices are also going to be 3, 4, 5 times higher because now I'm not filling containers with scraps of metal and chunks of steel. Now I'm filling trucks with track pieces. And just like they come into the park, sometimes you can only get 1 or 2 track pieces on a truck before it's reached either its weight limit or its size limit. And like, that's all we can do. And you have to send out and get another truck. It's a lot of trucks coming in and out, getting rid of that stuff, all in that exact time frame. So let's say that we were able to do that. We've got our friends, we've got our contractors, everyone pulled together. Where the original contractor said they'd rip and destroy the thing for $1 million, we're carefully saving it in the right time frame. It's costing us $5 million to save this thing. Does it sound economical? Well, $5 million is cheaper than a brand new one. So it's like, okay, what's the next step from here? What do we have to do? Well, we have to transport it to our new site, wherever that's going to be. Now time is on our side because if I'm a private entrepreneur and I don't care about when that ride opens, I have time. I can take all the pieces, I could set them in a laydown lot somewhere or on my new site, and then I can do everything else as needed. Now on my new site, what do I need? Well, I need everything that the old ride had. So what do I have to do? I have to get the air compressors together. I have to get trains because at this point, I'm going to assume every time a ride leaves, they don't throw the trains away. They just get absorbed somewhere else in whatever company it is. So I'm going to say that you need to get trains at $1.5 million, $2 million per train because I'm not going to go with the old stuff that was on there. I'm going to ask for something new. If it's a B&M ride, I'm going to go back to B&M and say, I need a new train for this ride. If nobody wants to touch it with a 10-foot pole, a lot of times you can go to companies that will do that. There are companies out there. Comeback Coasters is one of them. Premier Rides is one of them. Dynamic Attractions. You could do all those other companies that they just specialize in building stuff for old rides. lots of liability involved. Those things are not cheap at all because everything is custom designed from the ground up 100%. Way not cheap, but it is an option. So I have to go out to my ground now and I have to dig all the holes for all the footers. I have to go back to my original prints and get all the original steel components back together. Now it's like, well, the originals are actually still buried in the ground at the old site. So actually what you have to do is just you have to get the rebar and build the cages and set the footers up and use the ironwork per the print and set that all back together with the appropriate concrete in there. You need permits to do that in whatever city you're going to put it in. I don't care what city you put it in. You're going to have to permit all that work. And then you're going to need core sampling and things like that done to make sure the ground can handle the weight, to make sure that the concrete you poured in there is of the correct tensile strength so that it doesn't come apart. You need all that stuff for the thought of the manufacturer to stand back behind that product again. You're going to need new trains, and one of the biggest things that a lot of people don't think about is you are now going to need three-phase industrial power out there. I've heard all sorts of people, oh, I would get this and I would put it up behind my house. And one of my questions is, well, your house, your property, does it have three-phase industrial power coming in? No. It's like, well, that's going to be a problem. Now I can hear people already, hey, they do generators for that sort of stuff. That is true. They do generators for that sort of stuff. But it all depends on your frequency of running. You could rent a generator and run the ride a week and then call the generator off rent. Depends on what you want to do. You still need money coming in somehow to refurbish the ride. Because if you just set up a ride and you put all this money and effort into it and you never refurbish it, well, it's going to break down, and it's going to break down a lot. And then the more you run it, it's going to start breaking down in an unsafe fashion to where you're going to start seeing maybe fatigue or cracks or something. And who's inspecting it? Are you inspecting it? Do you know how to inspect it? You need someone to come in and train you now on how to do the inspections on this ride that you just picked up. It's a very twisted tale. It's not easy to do. The closest I've ever come was at my old work. We were getting rid of this, I believe it was a Zamperilla Joker. I get that when the Huss model confused with each other all the time, but I'm pretty sure it was a Zamperilla Joker. We were getting rid of it, and it was my wife's favorite ride. So it was her absolute favorite ride. I approached my maintenance director and I said, hey, that ride we're taking out, what are we doing with that ride? And he says, it's a flat ride. It's just a flat base ride. He says, nothing, we're going to throw it away. And I'm like, could I have it? And he said, yeah, you could have it. Right there. I legitimately just got a free ride. Legitimately, right there. I approached the park, said, can I have that ride? The park said yes. I got a free ride. Sweet. There's a caveat, though. He said, do you have any place to put it? And I'm like, I think so. I got, my grandma had like 10 acres of land out there. I'm like, I could put it there. And he says, same question I asked. Do you have three-phase power out of that land? And I'm like, well, no. And he's like, you're going to need not only three-phase power, but that's European power. So you're going to need a different transformer to step it down to 390. Most three-phase industrial power is 480 here in the U.S., and I believe that one was 390 that came in, which was considered an odd voltage here in the U.S. So he's like, you're going to need that to step down. And he said, you can have the ride if you want it. There's one little string, though, is that you have to get a trucking company to come in here and pick up all the parts and pieces and have them completely removed from site within, it was like 5 days or something, because that was happening quick. They had already taken the ride down and it was on the process of getting pulled out. So this was one of the things, since the park was getting rid of a lot of it, the park, honestly, in-house, because it was a smaller flat ride, the park cut up a lot of stuff and we were throwing it away in our own metal dumpster there. So not everything was just getting taken away like that. We threw a lot of stuff away on hand. And he said, do you think you can get a shipping company to come here and pick up all those components, which would have been about 4 truckloads of steel and stuff like that. So he says, do you think you could have that done in 5 days? It's like, no, I don't think I can. And he kind of smirked, and he's like, I don't think you can either. He says, plus there'd be the deal about insurance, because any shipping company that came on site would have to have the insurance for it, which not a big deal, but it sometimes throws a wrench in the works if we haven't used that company before. I'm like, okay, but he told me, he says, hey, if you can get it out within this amount of time, the ride's yours. It was free. I literally had a free ride sitting in my hands. I just couldn't pull off the, yeah, I'll take it out of there. Now, if I had more connections and knew more people and shipping companies and all that stuff, yeah, I might have been able to do that, but didn't work out for me that time. So, flash back and say, well, so when parks get rid of rides, you're gonna lose some stuff. You're gonna lose probably the trains and some motors and things like that. Assuming those go away, the air compressor, lift motor, the trains, and you're left with pretty much the track and structure. If you can tear down the track and structure in the time that the park gives you for the cost that the park would allow, which is going to be way under what you're going to need to do it in any sort of form where you can actually reuse that ride again. But if you can make all that happen, you too can get a free ride from an amusement park. Oh, what a heartburn. But yeah, that's kind of one of those little fun things. Say, oh yeah, you can get a ride for free from amusement park. What do I have to do? It's like, you just have to take it out in the time that they give you. And pretty much that drives everything right there. If you can get that ride out in the time that they give you without completely just flame cutting everything apart, you could have yourself a free ride. And then reassembling it, up to you completely. Good luck with that one. All right, wasn't a long video today, but I thought up this one. It's like, hey, did you know rides are free? And I was like, I should really make this video. So I really wanted to get on that and do that. All right, like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff downstairs. It does help me out. I do appreciate it. If you want to reach me, you can always just comment below. I try to respond to most comments, but some slip through my fingers and others, I just don't know what to say. And let's see, you could also email me at ryantheridemechanic@yahoo.com. And if you put the ride up on your own property, you might not even have air gates. Might decide not to use them. But if you're at an amusement park, they'll have air gates. And you'll have to stay off the air gates.